The jungle was silent. Too silent. Sergeant James "Jimmy" Castellano crouched behind a moss-covered log in the dense Vietnamese highlands, his M16 resting across his knees. It was 2:47 a.m. on August 14th, 1968, and something wasn't right. His platoon had been stationed at Firebase Murphy for 3 weeks, and every night the Viet Cong probed their defenses, testing, learning, waiting for a weakness. But tonight was different. Tonight, Jimmy had set up something his commanding officer called the stupidest contraption I've ever seen. Something his fellow soldiers laughed at during mess hall. Something made from discarded C-ration cans, fishing line, and spare M18A1 Claymore mines. They called it Castellano's Tin Can Circus. In exactly 4 minutes, that circus would save 23 American lives and earn Jimmy a Bronze Star with Valor device. But more importantly, it would change how the United States Army thought about perimeter defense in jungle warfare forever. This is the story of how a farm boy from Iowa turned trash into one of the most effective early warning systems of the Vietnam War, and how his innovation, mocked and ridiculed by officers and enlisted men alike, would be taught at Fort Benning for decades to come. Because sometimes, the difference between life and death isn't advanced technology or superior firepower. Sometimes, it's just a few tin cans and the ingenuity of a soldier who refused to die. James Castellano wasn't supposed to be in Vietnam. He was supposed to be back in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, helping his father run the family farm. 240 acres of corn and soybeans that had been in the Castellano family since 1891. But in 1966, when Jimmy turned 19, his draft number came up, and like thousands of other young American men, he traded his overalls for olive drab fatigues. But Jimmy brought something with him to Vietnam that most soldiers didn't have. Growing up on a farm meant Jimmy knew how to fix things. When the tractor broke down during harvest season, you didn't call a mechanic. You grabbed your tools and figured it out. When the fence posts rotted, you replaced them with whatever materials you had on hand. When coyotes threatened the livestock, you set up early warning systems using bells, wire, and whatever else you could scrounge. Jimmy's father used to say, "Son, an expensive solution is just a simple solution you overthought." That philosophy would save lives in the jungles of Vietnam. Jimmy arrived in country in March 1967, assigned to Bravo Company, 2nd Battalion, 503rd Infantry Regiment, 173rd Airborne Brigade. He was a private then, fresh-faced and terrified, trying not to show it. His first taste of combat came during Operation Junction City, a massive search and destroy mission near the Cambodian border. It was brutal. In his first firefight, Jimmy watched a booby trap made from a grenade and a tripwire take the leg off a soldier named Martinez. The screaming, the blood, the desperate scramble to get a medevac helicopter in before Martinez bled out. Jimmy held Martinez's hand while the medic worked, whispering reassurances he didn't believe himself. Martinez survived, but the image of that crude, simple trap haunted Jimmy. The Viet Cong didn't have sophisticated weapons. They didn't have million-dollar technology, but they were winning the psychological war through sheer ingenuity and an intimate knowledge of the terrain. They turned the jungle itself into a weapon, using punji stakes, tripwires, and hidden explosives to terrorize American forces. But here's what most people don't understand about Vietnam. The real danger wasn't the massive battles. It was the nights. The long, dark, terrifying nights where you sat in your foxhole, listening to every sound, wondering if that rustling in the bushes was wind or an enemy soldier crawling toward your position with a knife. Firebase Murphy was a small American outpost in Kontum Province, perched on a hilltop overlooking a network of suspected Viet Cong supply routes. It housed about 40 soldiers, a handful of artillery pieces, and a communications center. The firebase was strategically important because it allowed American forces to call in artillery strikes on enemy movements below, which meant the Viet Cong wanted it gone. By August 1968, Jimmy had been promoted to sergeant. He'd earned the respect of his men through a combination of competence, courage, and a remarkable ability to keep people alive. While other squad leaders relied on standard tactics, Jimmy improvised. He paid attention to patterns, he learned from mistakes, and most importantly, he listened to his instincts. Those instincts were screaming now. Firebase Murphy's perimeter defense consisted of standard military equipment, concertina wire, claymore mines positioned at key approach routes, and soldiers manning bunkers in a circular defensive position. Every night, 2-man listening posts were positioned 50 meters outside the wire, serving as early warning against enemy approach. It should have been enough, but it wasn't. The Viet Cong had been probing the firebase for 3 weeks, testing the defenses, mapping the patrol routes, timing the guard rotations. They were patient, methodical, and they were planning something big. Jimmy could feel it. On August 12th, 2 days before the attack, Jimmy approached his commanding officer, Lieutenant Marcus Brennan, with an idea. "Sir, permission to speak freely?" Brennan looked up from his paperwork, exhausted. The lieutenant was 23 years old, looked 40, and carried the weight of keeping 40 men alive on his shoulders. "Go ahead, Castellano." "Sir, our perimeter defense has gaps. The listening posts are good, but if Charlie moves slow enough, stays low enough, they can get within 20 meters of our wire before anyone spots them. I want to set up an additional early warning system." Brennan rubbed his temples. "We have claymores, we have listening posts, we have trip flares. What else do you want?" Jimmy pulled out a crude diagram he'd drawn on the back of a C-ration box. "Tin cans, sir. C-ration cans, filled with pebbles, suspended on fishing line between the wire and our positions. When someone trips the line, the cans rattle. It's simple, but effective. My dad used the same system back home to protect the chicken coops from foxes." Brennan stared at the diagram, like Jimmy had just suggested they defend the firebase with water balloons. "You want to defend an American firebase with garbage?" "Not defend, sir. Detect. The cans give us 5, maybe 10 extra seconds of warning. That's enough time to get to our weapons, call in support, trigger the claymores before they're on top of us." Brennan shook his head. "Castellano, I appreciate your creativity, but we're not running a carnival here. We have military-grade equipment for perimeter security. Use it." "Sir, the military-grade equipment has blind spots. The VC know exactly where our claymores are positioned because they probe the same routes every night. They're learning our patterns. This would be random, unpredictable. They won't expect it." "The answer is no, Sergeant. We're not hanging trash around the firebase. Dismissed." Jimmy saluted and left the command bunker, frustrated but not defeated. That night, he talked to his squad. Private First Class Danny Morrison, a kid from Philadelphia who could fix anything mechanical. Specialist Rick Huang, a Chinese-American soldier who spoke Cantonese and had an engineering degree from UC Berkeley. Corporal Thumper Thompson, a massive farm boy from Texas, who got his nickname from his ability to hump heavy loads through the jungle without complaint. "The LT shot it down," Jimmy told them, sitting in their bunker after dark. "Says it's stupid." Morrison lit a cigarette, the glow illuminating his face in the darkness. "Is it stupid?" "Probably," Jimmy admitted. "But stupid works sometimes. My dad defended our farm with bells and cans for 30 years. Never lost a chicken." Huang leaned forward. "The concept is sound. Audio warning systems are actually more reliable than visual ones in low visibility conditions. The military uses electronic sensors, but they're expensive and malfunction in humid environments. Your system is analog. No batteries, no electronics to fail." "Exactly," Jimmy said. "So here's what I'm thinking. We don't ask permission. We just do it. Set it up tonight in the sector we're responsible for. If it works, great. If it doesn't, we take it down and nobody's the wiser." Thumper grinned. "I like the way you think, Sarge. We doing this illegal-like?" "Not illegal, just unauthorized. There's a difference." Morrison laughed. "Yeah, the difference is whether you get an Article 15 or a court-martial." But they did it anyway. Building the early warning system was easier than Jimmy expected. The firebase generated mountains of trash. Sea ration cans were everywhere. Soldiers ate 3 meals a day from those cans: ham and lima beans, beef and potatoes, spaghetti and meatballs. Each can was cylindrical, about 4 inches tall, perfect for Jimmy's purposes. The fishing line came from care packages. Several soldiers received fishing gear from family back home, hopeful they might catch something edible from the nearby streams. They never did. The jungle streams were full of parasites and the water was unsafe. But the fishing line was perfect, strong, nearly invisible, and about 200 meters of it available. The pebbles came from the firebase itself. The hilltop was rocky and small stones were everywhere. Over 2 nights, while officially checking the perimeter, Jimmy and his squad set up their unauthorized early warning system. Here's how it worked. They positioned stakes every 10 feet along a 100-meter section of the perimeter, about 15 meters inside the wire but outside the bunker line. Between these stakes, they strung fishing line at ankle height. Every 5 feet along the fishing line, they attached a sea ration can filled with pebbles. The cans hung from short lengths of line, suspended about 6 inches off the ground. When someone walked through and hit the fishing line with their foot or body, the line would move. The movement would swing the cans, and the pebbles inside would rattle against the metal. In the dead silence of a jungle night, those rattles would sound like alarm bells. But they didn't stop there. Huang suggested a refinement. Different sectors would use different can sizes and different amounts of pebbles, creating distinct acoustic signatures. A soldier, hearing the rattle, could immediately identify which sector was being breached based on the sound. Morrison added another innovation. They attached small strips of poncho material to some of the cans, which would flutter and create additional noise when disturbed. By August 13th, the system was complete. 100 meters of perimeter protected by about 30 tin cans, 50 pebbles, and 200 meters of fishing line. Total cost, in military terms, 0. Total time invested, about 6 hours spread over 2 nights. The other squads noticed, of course. "What the hell is Castellano doing?" Sergeant Mike Kowalski asked during morning formation, pointing at the cans visible in the early light. Lieutenant Brennan walked over to investigate, and his face turned red when he saw what Jimmy had done. "Castellano, front and center!" Jimmy jogged over, knowing what was coming. "Yes, sir." "What is that?" Brennan pointed at the tin cans hanging from nearly invisible fishing line. "Enhanced perimeter security, sir. I specifically told you no to this circus act. With respect, sir, you told me not to hang trash around the firebase. This isn't trash. These are repurposed materials being used for defensive purposes, and it's only in my squad's sector. If it doesn't work, I'll remove it." "But sir, I'm responsible for the lives of my men. If there's even a 1% chance this gives us an edge, I have to take it." Brennan stared at Jimmy for a long moment. The other soldiers were watching now, waiting to see if Castellano was about to get his ass handed to him. Finally, Brennan sighed. "If this creates a safety hazard or interferes with operations, it comes down immediately. Understood?" "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." As Brennan walked away, Kowalski laughed. "Tin can circus. That's what we're calling this, Castellano. When Charlie walks right through it without making a sound, I'm going to remind you of this every day for the rest of your tour." "And when it works," Morrison shot back, "you're going to pretend it was your idea." The mockery continued all day. Soldiers walking past Jimmy's sector would kick the cans deliberately, making them rattle, then laugh. Someone wrote "Castellano's Carnival" on a piece of cardboard and stuck it near the cans. During lunch, a soldier made jingling noises every time Jimmy walked past. Even within his own squad, there were doubts. "Sarge, be honest," Morrison said that afternoon while cleaning weapons. "You really think this is going to work?" Jimmy looked at his handiwork, the tin cans hanging innocently in the afternoon sun. "Danny, you know what the difference is between the guys who make it home and the guys who don't?" "What?" "The guys who make it home are the ones who don't care about looking stupid. Pride gets you killed in this war. I'd rather be alive and embarrassed than dead and dignified." Morrison nodded slowly. "Fair point." That night, August 13th, Jimmy's squad manned their positions as usual. The tin cans hung silently in the darkness, barely visible even to the men who knew they were there. Nothing happened. No attack, no probing. Just another quiet night in Vietnam. Which meant the real attack was coming soon. The Viet Cong had a pattern. They'd probe a position for weeks, learning everything about it. Then they'd go quiet for a night or two while they assembled their forces and planned the assault. The silence wasn't peace. It was preparation. Jimmy spent August 14th preparing his squad. He inspected every weapon personally, made sure every man had full ammunition, checked the Claymore mines, verified the radio frequencies, rehearsed the retreat procedures if the perimeter was overrun. "You're making everyone nervous, Sarge," Huang said. "Nothing's going to happen tonight." "Something's coming," Jimmy insisted. "I can feel it." He was right. At 2:47 a.m. on August 14, 1968, a Viet Cong assault force of approximately 60 soldiers began their approach on Firebase Murphy. They moved in complete silence. These weren't conscripts or local militia. These were experienced NVA regulars, likely from the 304th Division, veterans of multiple campaigns. They knew how to move through jungle terrain without making a sound. They knew where the American listening posts were positioned. They knew the guard rotation schedules. They'd been watching for 3 weeks. They were professionals, and they were confident. The assault plan was simple but effective, a two-pronged attack hitting the north and east sides of the firebase simultaneously. The first team would breach the wire using Bangalore torpedoes, clearing a path for the assault force. The second team would suppress the bunkers with RPG fire. Once inside the perimeter, they'd overwhelm the Americans through superior numbers and close-quarters combat. It should have worked. The NVA soldiers reached the wire without detection. The American listening posts were positioned wrong, focused on the wrong approach routes. The claymores were exactly where the NVA expected them. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The lead element began crawling through the outer wire, moving slowly, professionally, making no sound. And then they reached Jimmy's sector. The first soldier, a squad leader named Nguyen, didn't see the fishing line. How could he? It was nearly invisible in the darkness, strung at ankle height. He was focused on the bunkers ahead, on his mission, on his men following behind. His foot caught the line. The line moved. The tin cans swung. And in the dead silence of that jungle night, the pebbles inside those cans rattled like thunder. Rattle, rattle, rattle. Jimmy's eyes snapped open at the sound. For half a second, he thought maybe it was wind, maybe an animal, maybe nothing. Then he heard it again. Rattle, rattle. Multiple cans, different tones, creating a cascading alarm across his sector. "Contact!" Jimmy screamed, grabbing his M16. "North sector! They're in the wire!" The firebase exploded into chaos. Soldiers tumbled out of bunkers, grabbing weapons, trying to orient themselves. Mortar teams scrambled to their guns. The radio operator began screaming coordinates into his handset, calling for artillery support from the bigger firebases nearby. But Jimmy's squad was already moving. They'd rehearsed this. Every man knew his role. Morrison hit the siren, a hand-cranked alarm that wailed into the night. Huang grabbed the detonators for the Claymore mines. Thumper and 2 others sprinted to pre-positioned firing positions with M60 machine guns. "Claymores!" Jimmy shouted. "Fire the claymores!" Huang twisted 3 separate detonators simultaneously. The night turned to day. Claymore mines are simple but devastating weapons. Each one contains 700 steel balls, backed by 1.5 pounds of C4 explosive. When detonated, those steel balls spray forward in a 60-degree arc at 4,000 feet per second, shredding everything within 50 meters. Jimmy's squad had positioned 6 claymores covering their sector. All 6 detonated within 2 seconds of each other. The Viet Cong assault force, caught in the open between the wire and the bunkers, never had a chance. The steel balls ripped through their formation like a hurricane of metal death. Men who'd survived battles from the DMZ to the Mekong Delta were cut down before they could even aim their weapons. But the NVA were professionals. They didn't panic. The surviving squad leaders immediately shifted tactics. If they couldn't move forward, they'd suppress the American positions with fire and wait for their second assault element to breach from the east side. RPGs streaked toward the bunkers, exploding in flashes of light and thunder. AK-47 fire tore through the night, green tracers mixing with red American tracers in a lethal light show. "Machine guns up!" Jimmy screamed over the chaos. Thumper opened up with his M60, the barrel flashing as he swept the wire, firing in controlled bursts. The M60 fired 550 rounds per minute, and Thumper was feeding it like a man possessed. brass casings ejected from the gun in a glittering stream, piling up at his feet. Morrison joined in with his M16, firing aimed shots at muzzle flashes. Huang worked the radio, coordinating with the other sectors, providing situation reports to Lieutenant Brennan in the command bunker. And Jimmy moved between positions, directing fire, keeping his squad focused, ensuring nobody did anything stupid, like standing up in the middle of a firefight. But here's what nobody expected. The tin cans were still working. 5 minutes into the firefight, Jimmy heard them again. Different sector this time, east side. Different tone, because these cans had fewer pebbles. "East side!" Jimmy screamed into the radio. "Second element breaching east wire!" Kowalski's squad was positioned there, and they heard Jimmy's warning. They triggered their claymores just as the second NVA element reached the wire. Another wave of devastation. More enemy soldiers cut down before they could even process what was happening. The NVA commander, watching from a position in the tree line, made a quick decision. This attack was blown. The element of surprise was gone. The Americans were alert and responding with coordinated fire. The claymores had devastated his assault force. He ordered a retreat. But retreating under fire is one of the most dangerous maneuvers in combat. You're exposing your back to the enemy. You're breaking contact while your opponent still has initiative. It requires discipline and training. The NVA had both. They fell back in sections, some soldiers providing covering fire while others withdrew, then switching roles. It was textbook military doctrine, executed under the worst possible conditions. And it probably would have worked, except for one thing: the tin cans. As the NVA soldiers retreated through the wire, trying to extract quickly, they kept hitting the fishing lines. The cans rattled, marking their exact positions in the darkness. It was like they were wearing bells, announcing their location to every American soldier on that firebase. "They're pulling back!" Morrison shouted. "Through the north wire!" "Mortars!" Lieutenant Brennan screamed from the command bunker. "Drop mortars on the north tree line!" The mortar teams had been waiting for this. They'd already calculated ranges and coordinates for every potential target around the firebase. Now they just had to execute. Thunk, thunk, thunk. 3 mortars launched in rapid succession, the 81mm rounds arcing through the night sky. 5 seconds later, the tree line erupted in explosions. Orange fireballs blossomed in the darkness, throwing dirt and vegetation and body parts into the air. The NVA soldiers, still in the wire, scrambled to escape. Some made it. Many didn't. The entire firefight lasted 11 minutes from first contact to last shot fired. When the sun came up 3 hours later, Lieutenant Brennan walked the perimeter with Jimmy, surveying the damage. 23 NVA soldiers lay dead in the wire. Another 15 blood trails led into the jungle, indicating wounded who'd been dragged away by their comrades. Weapons were scattered everywhere. AK-47s, RPG launchers, Chinese grenades, satchel charges meant to destroy the American bunkers. On the American side, 0 casualties. Not one soldier had been wounded in the assault. It should have been a massacre. The NVA had every advantage: surprise, superior numbers, detailed knowledge of the firebase's defenses. They should have breached the perimeter and overrun at least one sector before American reinforcements could respond. Instead, they'd been detected before they even reached the bunkers. Detected by tin cans and fishing line. Brennan stopped at one of Jimmy's makeshift sensors. The can was still hanging there, swaying slightly in the morning breeze. Pebbles rattled softly inside. "Castellano," Brennan said quietly. "Sir?" "I owe you an apology." "No, sir, you don't." "Yes, I do. You tried to tell me, and I dismissed you. That was wrong. If you hadn't set up this system, we'd be calling in medevac helicopters right now, instead of body bags for the enemy." Jimmy shrugged. "Just trying to keep my guys alive, sir." Brennan looked at the carnage in the wire, then back at the tin cans. "How did you know?" "Know what, sir?" "That this would work. That something so simple could make such a difference." Jimmy thought about his father back in Iowa. About 30 years of defending chicken coops with bells and wire. About the fundamental truth that sometimes the simplest solutions are the best ones. "Sir, my dad used to say that Charlie's not stupid, and we're not special. The only difference between winning and losing is who adapts faster. The VC adapted to our tactics, so we had to adapt to theirs. They use simple, effective weapons because that's what works in this environment, so I figured we should do the same." Brennan nodded slowly. "Battalion's going to want a full report on this. Your sensor system, how it works, how to replicate it." "It's not complicated, sir. Anybody can build it." "That's exactly why it's brilliant." News of Jimmy's tin can sensors spread through the 173rd Airborne Brigade like wildfire. Within a week, 3 other fire bases had implemented similar systems. Within a month, the tactical innovation was being demonstrated at brigade headquarters. Within 3 months, a modified version using military-grade materials was being taught at Fort Benning's infantry school. But the most immediate impact was psychological. The soldiers at Firebase Murphy, who'd spent weeks living in fear of nighttime attacks, suddenly felt safer. Not because they had better weapons or more men, but because they had an edge, a simple, reliable early warning system that gave them precious seconds to respond. Morale skyrocketed. Even Sergeant Kowalski, who'd mocked Jimmy mercilessly, came around. "Castellano," he said one afternoon, "I'm sorry I gave you shit about the cans." "Don't worry about it." "No, seriously, I was wrong. You saved lives. My squad's putting up our own sensors tonight. Think you could help us get it right?" Jimmy smiled. "Absolutely." Within 2 weeks, the entire firebase perimeter was covered with tin can sensors. Each squad customized their sector, adding their own innovations. Morrison figured out how to attach trip flares to some of the cans, creating both audio and visual warnings. Huang calculated optimal spacing for maximum coverage with minimum resources. Thumper built a more robust suspension system that held up better in rain. The tin can circus, as it was still mockingly called, became a point of pride. But Jimmy's contribution went beyond just the sensors themselves. He demonstrated something crucial about innovation in combat. You don't need expensive technology to solve problems. You need imagination, observation, and a willingness to look stupid if it means keeping people alive. Lieutenant Brennan recommended Jimmy for the Bronze Star with Valor device. The citation read, "For heroic achievement in connection with military operations against a hostile force." Sergeant Castellano displayed exceptional initiative and tactical acumen by developing an improvised early warning system that directly contributed to the successful defense of Firebase Murphy against a numerically superior enemy force. His innovation saved American lives and demonstrated the highest standards of military excellence. Jimmy received the medal in a small ceremony at the firebase, His squad stood at attention, while Brennan pinned the star to his uniform. There was no band, no formal parade, just 40 soldiers on a hilltop in Vietnam, recognizing one of their own. But the real recognition came later that night. Morrison approached Jimmy with a can of beer he'd somehow procured. "Sarge, I gotta ask, how'd you know it would work, really?" Jimmy took the beer, popped it open. "Honestly, I didn't. It was just the best idea I had at the time." "But you went ahead anyway, even when everyone thought you were crazy." "Yeah." "Why?" Jimmy looked out at the perimeter, at the tin cans hanging innocently in the fading light. "Because doing nothing wasn't an option. We had a problem. I had an idea. Maybe it would work, maybe it wouldn't, but I had to try." Morrison nodded. "That's the difference, isn't it? Between the guys who make it and the guys who don't." "What do you mean?" "The guys who make it are the ones who act, who try things, who don't just accept that this is how we've always done it means it's the right way to do it." Jimmy smiled. "Yeah, that's exactly it." The tin can sensors remained in place at Firebase Murphy for the duration of the American presence there. They were never defeated. The Viet Cong probed the firebase several more times over the following months, but they never attempted another major assault. Word had spread in the NVA command structure. Firebase Murphy had special defenses. The Americans had deployed some kind of advanced sensor technology that made night attacks impossible. The irony was delicious. The NVA, who prided themselves on fighting a low-tech war against American technological superiority, had been defeated by something even more low-tech than their own tactics. Jimmy's tour in Vietnam ended in March 1969. He returned to Iowa, to his family's farm, to a life that was supposed to be normal but never quite was. Like thousands of other Vietnam veterans, he carried memories that haunted him. But he also carried something else, the knowledge that he'd made a difference, that his innovation had saved lives, that he'd looked at a problem everyone else accepted and found a solution everyone else missed. He went back to farming, fixed tractors, mended fences, and yes, he still protected the chicken coops with bells and wire, just like his father had taught him. Here's what most people don't know about military innovation. The best ideas rarely come from generals or defense contractors or research labs. They come from sergeants and specialists and privates who are actually facing the problems in real time. Soldiers who can't afford to wait for the perfect solution and have to improvise with whatever's available. Jimmy Castellano's tin can sensors were eventually replaced with electronic ground sensors, laser tripwires, and other high-tech systems. But the principle remained the same: create layers of early warning that give defenders time to respond. In Afghanistan and Iraq, American soldiers used similar improvised detection systems. Soda cans filled with pebbles, Christmas bells attached to wire, motion-sensitive lights scavenged from hardware stores. The technology changed, but the fundamental insight didn't. Simple solutions work. Today, if you visit the infantry school at Fort Benning, you'll find Jimmy's story in the coursework on tactical innovation. Not because his sensors were revolutionary, but because his thinking was. He saw a problem. He refused to accept that the official solution was the only solution. He experimented, he adapted, he improvised. That's the real lesson of the tin can circus. Innovation in combat doesn't require genius. It requires observation, creativity, and the courage to try something that might fail. It requires looking at the resources you have rather than complaining about the resources you don't have. It requires being willing to look stupid if it means staying alive. Jimmy Castellano passed away in 2019 at the age of 72. His obituary mentioned his Bronze Star and his service in Vietnam, but it didn't mention the tin cans. Most people at his funeral didn't know the story, but his squad remembered. Morrison, Huang, and Thumper all attended the funeral. They were old men now, grey and weathered, carrying decades of life between Vietnam and that Iowa cemetery. And after the service, they did something unusual. They went to Jimmy's grave and placed 3 sea ration cans on the headstone. Each can filled with pebbles. Each can a reminder of the night when garbage became genius, when mockery became respect, when a farm boy from Iowa changed how the United States Army thought about perimeter defense. Because in the end, that's what Jimmy's story is really about. It's about refusing to accept that good enough is acceptable when lives are on the line. It's about trusting your instincts even when everyone else doubts you. It's about understanding that innovation doesn't require advanced degrees or million-dollar budgets. Sometimes it just requires a few tin cans, some fishing line, and the courage to try something different. They mocked his tin can trip sensor until it wiped out an entire patrol, saved 23 American lives, and changed military doctrine forever. And that's a legacy worth remembering. So the next time you hear someone dismiss an idea as too simple or not sophisticated enough, remember Sergeant James Castellano and his tin can circus. Remember that the Viet Cong fought the most powerful military in human history to a standstill using weapons made from bamboo and recycled materials. Remember that some of the most effective military innovations in history came from soldiers improvising with whatever they had. Because warfare isn't about having the best technology, it's about having the best ideas. And sometimes, the best ideas come from the most unexpected places, like a chicken coop in Iowa. If you enjoyed this story of battlefield innovation and American ingenuity, make sure you're subscribed to Patriot Wars. Hit that like button. Drop a comment telling us about any military innovations you've heard of that came from improvisation rather than formal research. And remember, in war, as in life, the difference between success and failure often comes down to one simple question. Are you willing to look stupid if it means staying alive? Sergeant James Castellano was, and that's why his men came home. This is Patriot Wars, where America's battle stories come to life. Stay vigilant, stay innovative, and never underestimate the power of a tin can.